I'm here at the Western Museum of Flight with Captain Royce Williams, and you flew during the Korean War. Can you tell us a little about the number of missions?
Yes, I don't have the definite number split. I think I have 227 missions, but that's between Vietnam and Korea. Probably about 80 missions in Korea.
Well, there's one mission in particular I'd like to ask you about, and that's one of the most unusual stories I've heard. Can you share that with us?
Yes, it came as a super surprise. We normally spent our talent in destroying logistics and trains, bridges, trucks, storage areas, and close air support for the soldiers on the ground. And that limited us to hit some of the targets that were our responsibility farther north near the Soviet Union. A decision was made to form up a task force with three carriers and move up closer so that we could strike those on the Yalu River, which happened to be the border between North Korea and the Soviet Union. I was on the first flight of the morning in good weather. It was a three-carrier strike, and we hit targets at Horiang, a major city on the river, with a lot of warehousing and industry, manufacturing. And this was well noted by the Russians, and it stirred them up to where they got agitated, and they had a lot of airplanes flying and a lot of chatter to show their concern. And when I went back to my ship, the USS Oriskany, and landed, I was told that I had the next combat air patrol mission. So I rushed through lunch, came back and got briefed, and the weather turned terrible. A blizzard came through, and we had low ceilings, heavy snow and blowing blizzard conditions. And I was briefed on it. I'd been on these combat air patrol missions before, and we didn't expect to encounter any enemy over the water. They just didn't fly out that way. Well, this was a new look at it. I guess from the Soviets, they thought somehow rather threatened, or we ought to be punished for coming up and closer to their territory. Well, there were four of us on this mission. I'm flying an F-9, F-5 Panther Grumman, and we formed below the clouds, 400 feet, and climbed through the clouds to on top at 12,000 feet. While in the climb, our controller at the combat center on the carrier, we were informed that there were inbound bogies, unknown aircraft. So this was news to us. It was unexpected. When we popped out on top, and it was clear above, I could see at a distance, probably 20 miles, at extreme altitude, someplace around 50,000 feet, the contrails from 7 aircraft. At this point, the leader of the flight declared an emergency. He got a warning light, and he was instructed to remain over the task force. So I took the lead along with the wingman, and I charged my guns, test fired, and had all my weaponry ready to go. As they passed over me, I could see they were MiG-15s. Very unexpected. And they turned about and headed back north, and I thought going home, likely from Russia. So they said to pursue, and I continued to climb in their direction, and when they got maybe 20, 30 or more miles to the north, I'm still tracking them because of the highly visible contrails, and they split into two groups, left and right, with 4 on one side and 3 on the other, as though to bracket something or maybe get ready to go and land. I didn't know. But when they did this, I lost sight of them when they dove out of the contrail level, and the radar at the control center lost control of them, and so they ordered me to return to establish a barricade between the last sighting and the task force. And I was at 26,000 feet at full throttle, and 4 of them came on in attacking, all were firing. And I pulled hard and turned into them and ended up in a good shooting position on their number 4 airplane. And since they were firing already, we knew this was serious, and I fired a short burst, and number 4 airplane started dropping out of formation. At that point, my wingman left me and followed this airplane down, so the rest of my engagement was with those airplanes and the other 3. There were now 6. And I reported that I thought I'd shot one down. They didn't instruct me to do that, but since they started the fight, I was in it. And I reported that I thought I got one, and they said, "Do not engage." I said, "We are engaged." They said, "Go get them." So the fight was on.
What was the condition of your aircraft?
Excellent. They did not hit me, and everything was go. The airplane itself was not a match for a MiG-15, but it was a good gun platform, and I was ready. So the 3 remaining of that formation dazzled me in that they could climb so abruptly and accelerate, and it was just a show of a wonderful airplane. And they climbed up to probably 2,000 feet above me and then reversed. The guy that just lost his wingman came on in, and I was going to pick him as a target when he was in the sun, and I looked over and I saw the other 2 already coming on back at me. So I reversed and I tracked the lead airplane. He fired. He had bigger guns, 37 millimeter and 23 millimeter. I had 420s. He opened fire, and when I thought he was in range, I made a short burst, and he turned away. And his wingman then continued on, and I then sighted on him, and we came on head-to-head. At some point, I think I hit him. He quit firing, and they didn't maneuver, and he just went underneath me. Well, the other 3 airplanes that had been part of the 7 were now in the fight, so I guess I'm down to maybe 5 or so at this time remaining. And they were now flying as individuals instead of as a flight, and they were taking turns, and they would come in and fire, and my intention was to counter that and hang in there as best I could. A lot of times they would come by and pull up so abruptly that I couldn't aim at them, but occasionally they would make a mistake and turn at my level, and I had opportunities then to shoot at them. So this went on. Normally an air-to-air fight is seconds to maybe a few minutes. This lasted for over 30 minutes of shooting at one another. And one guy slipped in front of me in quite close range, and I fired, and he started coming apart, and I had to pull drastically to avoid hitting him. And at a later point, toward the end of this thing, I had another one smoking, and I was behind him, but I ran out of ammunition, and so not a real reason to stick around. So I was going to turn and get back, and in that turn, I got hit by another MiG firing 37 millimeter that went into the wing butt, where the wing abuts to the fuselage, and exploded in the accessory section of the engine, which knocked all of my electric and hydraulic and severed my cable to the elevator, to the rudder, and pretty much wiped out my aileron control, which was a hydraulic boost. I had an elevator, the tail. I could go up and down. This guy settled right in behind me at ideal shooting range, and I was headed toward the task force and where that storm was, and I headed for that, and I pushed the stick hard forward and then hard back, and he was just shooting away, but that maneuver saved my life, and I got into the clouds, and he lost sight of me, and I lost sight of him. So, I'm not aware of how serious a problem I have. I'm not in a good position to eject because of the conditions of the water. Though I was wearing an immersion suit, I'd probably last less than 20 minutes for sure, and there wouldn't be any rescue capable to intercede. So I headed back to the task force. I knew the cloud lever, so I just let down until I was in the clear underneath it, and proceeded. As the task force came into sight, they were at general quarters because of this encounter, ready to fight with guns free, meaning if they thought there was a threat and it was unidentified, they were cleared to shoot. Well, they didn't identify me coming into it, and so they opened up on me as an enemy. Well, my commanding officer had just taken off from the Oriskany at that time and was about to go up and take my place in the fight, if there would be one. And he noticed that I was being shot, so he notified the task force that I was friendly. They stopped shooting. So my next problem would be how to land aboard the aircraft carrier. And it was way out of trim. I was having two hands on the stick to control it, and testing, getting the landing gear down by gravity and the tail hook, and then testing to at what point I could come in. And I found that at 170 knots, 200 miles an hour, that I would lose control of the airplane. So I was going to have to come in faster than anybody had ever done, way beyond my normal. So they had airplanes spotted in the landing area. This is before the angle deck, straight deck, and we're limited then to where we could place airplanes and when you can land. So when they were ready, I was in position so when they turned into the wind, I would be aiming at the ship, the carrier. But I could not line up with it. So when they gave me a signal that I could come in and land, I came in at the best speed I could, which is about 200 miles an hour. And I was pointing at the ship, but I couldn't line up with the landing direction. And so I was afraid if I touched down at all, I would just go over the side, across the deck. And I told that to the landing signal officer, who said, well, we'll cut you for an early wire, which would do the best he could to give me the most landing space available. But the commanding officer of the carrier turned it at the proper moment and lined up with me, and I landed and caught the number 3 wire just as though it was normal, and it wasn't.
So how much damage was done to your aircraft?
Well, I looked it over, but I was to get down in the ready room and start debriefing and so forth, and it wasn't my job to stay up on the flight deck. And they were going to land the rest of my flight right behind me. And I noticed it was pretty well shot up. But my plane captain, the guy who kind of owns the airplane, would take a grease pencil and go around all the perforations. Some of them weren't really big, but they were explosions and stuff. And he circled 263 holes.
And how long did it take to repair that?
I have no idea. I thought they pushed over the side. The next, we went into port shortly after that in Yokosuka, Japan, and I was ordered to report to Admiral Briscoe, who was the senior naval admiral in the Western Pacific. And before I left the ship to go to his headquarters, I wanted to see the airplane one more time. So I talked to a hangar deck air bosun and said, can I take a look at the plane? And he says, we pushed it over the side. And that was my belief until very recently. Someone said, no, that bureau number had been traced and had been repaired and had been used later on as a training airplane in the training command. So I assumed that for years and years. It's just very recently, last year, I think, that I was told the other part of the story. So I went in and see the admiral. I happened to know his flag lieutenant. I'd served with him before. Asked what's going on. Don't know. The admiral wants to see you right now, privately. So I went in his office and met him. He closed the door. He had an intelligence officer in with him that just listened and didn't participate. And he said, now, what I'm about to tell you, you'll never be able to tell anybody ever. And then he proceeded to tell me we had a new capability in the United States known as the NSA, and that they were present for their first operational mission aboard the cruiser, the U.S. Helena, and that they had these airplanes from takeoff till the remnant came back. And they want that young man to know that he got at least 3. Now, don't tell anybody.
And how long was it before you told someone?
Years, something around 50, I suppose. However, I suppose you know I had a meeting with President Eisenhower and all of his elite. And they, of course, knew what it was about, and that's why I was requested to go there. So there were certain people that were aware of this, but I never ran across any that ever discussed it with me. So when I came back to the squadron, I talked to the other people involved, and they didn't make any claims or anything that they did anything, except they were up there for part of it and landed safely back aboard. And I had various other assignments after that, and so at one point after I was retired, I was talking to an admiral that I'd served with several times, and he knew about this involvement. The Navy came out with their own story and was quite different. And so that lasted in the public for many years, and it gave me credit for shooting down one. And the admiral said, I know there's more to this, Royce. And what about it? And I said, I'm not able to disclose. He says, it's so long ago, it's no longer classified, and you can go ahead and talk about it. So he was the first one I told. And I guess only, and then I said, no, there isn't a lineup of people that want to hear this story. I don't go out and say, hey, listen to me. So the next person I told was my wife. And she said, oh, Royce. That was her reaction.
So how did other friends and family react when they found out you had such an amazing experience?
Well, I really didn't tell them. I have a brother, who's a retired Marine colonel, that did pretty much the same thing I did and has a lot of carrier time. And I was at some event at the Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. This was, I don't know, several years ago, but it was new at that time. And so I was able to tell about it, and there was somebody there in charge that asked me to get up and speak about it. And when I did, my brother was in the audience, and that was the first time he knew about it, and he couldn't believe it.
That's a fantastic story. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, that's an hour and 30 minutes out of a 37 military career. So I had lots of other fun.
Well, thank you for your service.
You're entirely welcome.